أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يعلم الله الذين جاهدوا منكم ويعلم الصابرين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، سيما بقية الله في الأرضين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope you're all well. The month of Ramadan is treating you nicely, that you're all praying, and you can hear me. You know what to do if you can hear me. Brilliant. Okay, so we're continuing today with the story of Musa alayhi salam in the Holy Quran, and we've talked about his whole journey up until the point where he actually arrives at the burning bush. At that burning bush, we talked about what Allah said to him, how he introduced himself, how he said, Ya Musa, and then asked him what's in his hand. He said, This is my staff, I do this with it, I do that with it. And then he talked about how into your jabe, into your pocket, into your side, your chest, and it comes out white. And we've had all of those beautiful discussions. Now, all of that is a prelude and it's building up to this great commandment that Allah is now going to give to Prophet Musa. And this is when Prophet Musa is told to go and confront Pharaoh. Subhanallah. So if you guys could turn to Surah Taha, that's Surah 20, verse 24. And then you can follow along, inshallah. So that's Surah 20, verse 24. I really do hope that you guys have downloaded those Quran apps. Sorry about that, guys. I'm back now. Sorry about that. Okay, so hopefully you've turned to that surah now, Surah 20, verse 24. So this is the great commandment that Allah is now going to give to Musa. He says, Go to Pharaoh. Indeed, he has transgressed. اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى. Moses said, My Lord, expand for me my breast. قال رب اشرح لي صدري. Okay, now look at how immediate the transition is. As soon as Allah gives Musa alayhi salam this commandment, there's no questioning about it, there's no hesitation. Musa alayhi salam understands that this is his duty and he immediately embarks upon it. Part of that embarking upon it is to pray for the ability to handle such a great task. He's going to go and confront not just a Taghut, but the biggest Taghut possibly of the entire planet Earth at that time. The Pharaoh was no joke. But look at the beautiful prayer that Musa makes in this regard. He says, Oh my Lord, expand for me my breast. By the way, every lecture that I begin, I always begin it with this dua. And it's a common practice among the scholars to actually recite this dua. For you guys, if you, inshallah, have presentations or you want to do any kind of public speaking at any point in time, this is a beautiful dua to begin with. Any video that you have ever seen of mine, before I started recording that video, I would recite this behind the scenes. قال رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. O my Lord, expand for me my breast. Your heart becomes tightened when you have a big task ahead of you. You get scared, it gives you this anxiety, right? And so you get this tight feeling. Musa is saying, Oh Allah, expand for me this breast of mine, my chest, my heart. Don't let me become suffocated by the heaviness of this task that lies ahead of me. And then he says, and ease for me my task, make it easy for me, and untie the knot from my tongue. وَاحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِّن لِسَانِي. Some people have interpreted this as Musa having a lisp or having some sort of speech impediment. I don't know if that's a reality, um, because this is a general dua that you can imagine all the prophets to some capacity would have prayed. And in the Shia madhab, among the scholars of the Shia school of thought, the argument prevails that the prophets never had any defects which would prevent them from delivering the clear message, because that would defeat the purpose of being a messenger in the first place. So that's something to bear in mind here. And then he says, the purpose for which I want you to loosen this knot of my tongue, allow me to speak properly, efficiently, and eloquently is so that they can understand my speech. Okay. Then he says something extraordinary. He says, and appoint for me a minister, a vizier from my family. وَاجْعَلْ لِي وَزِيرًا مِّنْ أَهْلِي هَارُونَ أَخِي. Haroon, my brother. I was in a exam once. It was an oral exam. It was, I think, in my second year of the Hausa, and the teacher was sitting in front of me, and he said, "Right." It was the very last question of the exam, and he said to me, "Prove to me that only Allah can appoint the wali or the successor of a prophet. Prove it to me from the Quran." And I was like, "What? How do I prove that?" You're claiming that Imam Ali alayhi salam was chosen by Allah and that the Prophet merely announced that when he said, Man kuntu mawla fahada Ali mawla, for whomsoever I am the Mawla, Ali is also the Mawla. We don't believe that this was the Prophet's own choice per se, but rather it was Allah's commandment which he was conveying to the people. And of course, what Allah wills and what the Prophet wills do come together. But the overwhelming point here is that Allah is the ultimate decider of these such issues. And so he asked me to prove that from the Quran. And I could not think of it for the life of me. He gave me a little nudge in the right direction, and then it suddenly clicked. And I said, when Musa said, um, appoint for me a wazir min ahli, a minister, a, a vicegerent from my family. Haruna akhi, my brother Haroon. And then he says in verse 31, increase through him my strength. Ushdud bihi azri, and let him share my task. Wa ashrikhu fi amri. So here you see that Musa alayhi salam did not have arrogance where he's like, oh, Allah's appointed me for this task. I'm going to decide who my vicegerent and minister is going to be and successor. No, he says, oh, Allah, I want this person. If it pleases you, then choose this person for me. And why does he choose this person? Why does he want this person? And let him share my task. وَأَشْرِكْهُ فِي أَمْرِي, that we may exalt you much. كَيْ نُسَبِّحَكَ كَثِيرًا, and remember you much. وَنَذْكُرَكَ كَثِيرًا, indeed you are of us ever seeing. إِنَّكَ كُنْتَ بِنَا بَصِيرًا. And then Allah responds to him and says, قَالَ قَدْ أُوتِيَتَ سُؤْلَكَ يَا مُوسَى, you have been granted your request, O Musa. Okay, so we're going to skip ahead a little bit here, but I hope that that point came across to you that, you understand that even from the Quran, it is very clear that even a messenger of God, even the prophet, does not have the right to choose his own minister. It is Allah who has to choose that person. The prophet can merely give a request, he can merely pray for it. And if you are reminded, remember the prophet actually said that, O Ali, you are to me as Haroon was to Musa. And so this is an indication for us in both the Shia and the Sunni books, a very clear and obvious example that if you bounce it off the Quran, if you reflect it off the Quran, it becomes glaringly obvious that Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam was indeed the vicegerent, the minister of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, just like Harun was to Musa. Okay, then we're going to skip ahead a little bit. We're going to go to verse 40. And here Allah begins this dialogue with Musa. You have to imagine that Musa falls to his knees, that he must have become full of tears and overwhelmed with emotions because Allah starts to tell him his entire story. And he says, remember when you were put into the river and then you were adopted by the house of Pharaoh, and then we inspired your mother to do that, and then we sent your sister, and then she brought you back to your mother, and then she suckled you, and then you killed someone, but we saved you from retaliation and tried you with a severe trial, and you remained some years now among the people of Madian. Then Allah says, ثم جئت على قدر يا موسى. Then you came here at the decreed time, O Musa. So Allah has actually given him an entire recap of his entire life up until this very moment. It's almost like if you could go into the mind of Musa alayhi salam, you've seen your entire life flash before your eyes. Allah has explained every moment of it to you in detail so that you can understand where you've come from, what you've gone through. And then now Allah is saying that you have come here at the decreed time. The reason I wanted to linger a little bit on this verse today is because of the word that Allah uses for the decreed time. What word does he use? Qadr. ثم جئت على قدر يا موسى. You have come here as per the qadr, O Musa. These nights, these holy and sacred nights, what are they? They are the nights of qadr, the nights of power, the nights of destiny. And so that same word is being employed here by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us understand the will and the power of Allah, how your destiny will take you through certain phases in your life. And eventually, inshallah, if you pass those previous tests, Allah will gradually increase your spiritual abilities, your understanding, your knowledge, until you come to the pivotal moment in your life where you truly realize your purpose. This is Musa's purpose now. You are the one that I am going to choose to bring down the greatest Taghut in the entire world, the Pharaoh. Now, if I say it in that way, you'll understand just how great a mission this was. And, if you imagine somebody gives you a great mission or a great deed, it's going to tighten your breast. It's going to make you feel really scared. It's going to make you anxious. It's going to make you feel like, oh my God, how can I do this alone? Sometimes we think to ourselves that, in order to accomplish something great, many of us have dreams. We all have these ambitions, inshallah. We want to bring a positive change in the world. And we think to ourselves, in order to accomplish this, we're going to need a team. We're going to need a whole group of people. We're going to need a whole civilization, perhaps. Well, guess what? You only need one person. You need two people. That's pretty much it. Musa doesn't say, give me this people or this qawm or that people. Nah, most of them are going to be useless. He says, give me Haroon. with Haroon, I can accomplish this, inshallah. In another place in the Quran, Allah says, and this is one of the most favorite verses, I believe, of Imam Khomeini, where he says, إِنَّمَا أَعِظُكُمْ بِوَاحِدًا أَن تَقُومُوا لِلَّهِ مَثْنَى وَفُرَادًا. Allah says, I advise you to only one thing, that you rise for the sake of Allah in your pairs or alone, either in twos or on your own. And so there is this theme of finding that one person who's going to help you in the task that lies ahead. When you embark on your journey, dear brothers and sisters, inshallah, Allah will help you find that person. But again, the point here is sometimes when you create an institution or you create some sort of movement, there's people who you might have preference for, but they are not best suited for the role of, for example, being a minister, being the representative. They're not suited for a certain role. You have to trust in Allah that He is going to choose those right people, and that power does not fall into your hands. You can request it, you can pray for it, but you're not always going to get what you desire. Okay, now we're going to go ahead a little bit because this section, this portion of the Quran goes on until the end of the surah. And I would like you guys to go away, inshallah, sometime and actually read through it and extrapolate for yourselves. But because we're short on time, I wanted to jump ahead just a little bit and go to the confrontation scene. So this is where Musa has been appointed his task. Now we're going to go to where Musa actually speaks to the Pharaoh, right? Now he goes to Pharaoh, and what does he tell him? He tells him, I'm the messenger of God, and you have to let the people, Bani Israel, free. Subhanallah. We're going to go to Surah 26, verse 18. Surah 26, verse 18, to find the reply of Pharaoh. What does Pharaoh say? And in this is a message for us for the kinds of arguments that those tawaghit, those tyrannical powers, will use against you when you attempt to challenge them in any way. And therefore, it's very important for us to pay close attention. Pharaoh says to Musa when he comes in, just imagine Musa has come into his palace now, he's come into the court, he's surrounded by all these people and extravagance, and then you have this Pharaoh sitting at the top of his throne looking down at you. He's got all these guards around him. What have you got? A stick. Maximum, you've got Haroon next to you, that's it. Right? And you both look pretty shabby comparatively. Right? You've come out of the desert, you've come out of Madian, which is like a village, right? It's not even the civilized place. The civilized place, the Sheik place, the place where they've got all the best furniture and the most high tech stuff. That's Egypt. That's where it's happening. That's where it's going on. So now you guys look like a bunch of hillbillies. And now you're standing in front of this Pharaoh and you're telling him you're a messenger of God and you are being oppressive and you need to let your slaves free. So what does Pharaoh reply with? He says, did we not raise you among us as a child and you remained among us for years of your life? قال ألم نربك فينا وليدا ولبثت فينا من عمرك سنين. Why is this the first thing that Allah tells us Pharaoh actually responds with? Because, dear brothers and sisters, you have to understand that when it comes to us, respectively, if we are going to embark on this Quranic, revolutionary Islamic journey, and we're going to discover what our staff and our hand is, and we're going to use that to propel us on this journey of change in the society to bring about reforms, social and political reforms. Often you are going to be the most effective person for the place where you were raised. Where was Musa raised? In Egypt. Yes, he's from Bani Israel, but he was raised not only in Egypt, but he was raised in the palace itself, pretty much. Okay. And therefore, it's going to come down to you, dear brothers and sisters, to challenge where you're at. Okay, so for example, if you're from Kashmir, your duty is to rise against the Taghut in Kashmir. If you're from Pakistan, Pakistan. If you're from India, India. If you're from America, America. If you're from any country in the world, you need to look at the oppressive stances of that place from which you were raised, because you are better inclined to understand the language first and foremost, and secondly, you're better inclined to understand the culture and all the subtleties. Other people won't be able to understand those things. And this is a common theme also in the Quran. You see, the prophets were sent to people bilisanihi, with their tongues, right? So if Allah wanted to send a prophet to the Chinese people, he's not going to send an Arab prophet or an African prophet to them. No, he's going to send a prophet who can speak Chinese. The dynamics, of course, of the world have changed to an extent where there is a Taghut in today's world, which pretty much dominates the entire planet. And so that Taghut, it should be a target for everybody wherever you are. But the point is, one of the arguments that that Taghut will use against you is that who are you to question us? We're the ones who raised you. You were just a baby, you were nothing. We gave you your citizenship, we gave you your education, we gave you your certificates, we gave you your job. You remained among us for many years of your life. How dare you speak against us? And many people at this point will become stumped and they'll be like, you're right. That, yes, it's the Taghut, but it's kind of like my dad. It's kind of like my mom. It's my Rabb. It's the thing which nourished me. It's that thing which actually raised me. Subhanallah. How can I possibly have the audacity to speak against it? If you are not connected to the Quran, you will be stumped in such circumstances, because only through the Quran, pretty much, will you understand the mentality of those who you are confronting and the spirit of resistance that you're supposed to have, the Musawi spirit that Allah wants you to possess. So, verse 19 says, Pharaoh added on top of that, and then he said, and then you did your deed, which you did, and you were the ungrateful. So, if you recall back to the time where Musa was actually among the people of Egypt, at that time, he did some activities. And through those activities, somebody ended up dying because he punched him, right? And so this is a strategic mistake. And this is one of the reasons, by the way, it can be seen as a dhanb, as a strategic mistake. I'm not saying it's haram. Anybody who tells you that it was a sin, it wasn't a sin. Musa alayhi salam did the right thing, in fact, in that situation. But the problem is, those such things can now be used against him. And that's precisely what the Pharaoh is doing. He is not listening to the arguments of Pharaoh. He's not listening, sorry, to the arguments of Musa. He's not saying, maybe I should listen to this. No, ad hominem. Sometimes when you get into debates with people, what do? They don't focus on the argument itself. They don't bring logical proofs to refute your arguments. What do they say to you? You're that guy who did such and such thing. You're that sister who did such and such thing. Pharaoh is doing the same thing here with Musa, right? And he's saying, you're the guy who punched a guy and you killed him. Who are you to talk to me about oppression? Ooh, what is Musa supposed to say here? Well, it tells you what he says. Musa said, I did it then when I was of those astray. قال فعلتها إذا وأنا من الضالين. Ooh, Musa alayhi salam, the prophet of God, is saying, I was among the dhaleen. I used to be astray. I was completely lost in those days. I didn't know what I was doing. Is this not proof that the prophets committed sins? Again, no, it is not. Um, and I want to say that in in an open sense, because you have to understand the prophets still considered themselves as sinful. Okay. They believed that they were the worst people among humanity. Ah, God, it's such a difficult thing to understand, and you won't understand it unless you really, really contemplate about it. And I want to give you a hadith here to explain it. Musa alayhi salam was called onto the mountain, and Allah spoke to him and he said, "Oh Musa, I want you to go and find somebody in the society who's worse than you." Okay, so he goes into the society, he looks around, and he sees all sorts of people. Hey, they're committing all sorts of sins, by the way. It was Bani Israel at the end of the day. They were, oh, horrible people. But the point is, every time he saw somebody sinning, he could never bring himself to say, ah, I'm better than this person. Yes, that person might be committing a sin, but there's a reason behind it. Maybe if I was in the same situation, I would have done the same thing. Allah has prevented me from it. That doesn't give me the right to say that I'm better than this person. Yes, the sin is wrong, and the job of the prophets and those who follow the prophets is to say this sin is absolutely awful, it's dreadful, it's evil. However, to bring yourself to a point where you can actually say, I'm better than this person, it's very difficult for a prophet to do because Allah has enlightened them. And then the hadith continues and it says that then he saw dog, a dog. And he was like, oh, I'll tell Allah this dog, I'm better than this dog. But by the time he walked to the top of the mountain and he was in his conversation with Allah, he said, oh, Allah, I was going to say that dog, but then I realized that no, I can't bring myself to say that I'm inherently better than that. Allah replies to Musa and he says, oh, Musa, had you brought anyone and said, I am better than this person, you would have lost your prophethood. Your status as a prophet would have been taken away from you. Okay, so you have to understand the mentality, the understanding of the prophets was so high that Allah made their humbleness to such a great extent that they would speak about themselves in such a manner. And if they didn't speak about themselves in such a manner, their status in the eyes of God would have fallen. Subhanallah. And so when he's saying, I was among the Dhalin, this should come as no surprise to us. A prophet doesn't stand and say, huh, I'm good. I am just so good. You know, it just doesn't make sense for anybody to have that attitude if they are a divinely inspired person. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is this. Pharaoh is bringing all these arguments. He's doing ad hominem. He's attacking him. He's saying, I'm the one who raised you. You were born and raised in this society. You remained among us for many years. We're essentially the ones who built you up. We promoted you to begin with, and now you're challenging us. And on top of it, you did a terrible deed, right? Musa alayhi salam is going to get drawn into that conversation. He doesn't want to get into that conversation. That is not the purpose for which he has been sent. He wants to bring the conversation to something else. And so he just ends the conversation there. He's like, you're absolutely right. I'm terrible. But check this out. Okay. This is a sign for us again that sometimes people draw you into conversations, and this happens a lot online, where people will just attack you and they will use the worst kinds of language sometimes, and sometimes they'll say really pinching things. Notice these are really pinching things for Musa. Imagine if you've been raised by a society and then they're saying to you, "Oh, you're going against the whole thing that you were raised by." That's very pinching, that's like, oh, I don't know what to say about that. He's right. Sometimes the enemy will use the truth to attack you. It's the truth. He did punch that guy did die, right? And now Musa's being drawn into that conversation. In a similar way, sometimes you should learn to just end the conversation. You're absolutely right, I'm an idiot, but check this out, right? You're absolutely right, I did do this wrong, but how about this, right? Just to end the conversation. And then he actually explains to him and he says, I fled from you when I feared you. I was afraid of you. Then my Lord granted me wisdom and prophethood and appointed me as one of the messengers. I'm not going to extrapolate, inshallah. If you have extrapolations for this particular verse, do feel free to share them with me at the end. But I want to take it to the next part. He says to him in verse 22, "And is this a favor of which you remind me that you have enslaved the children of Israel? Israel, وتلك نعمة تمنها علي أن عبدت بني إسرائيل." Pharaoh is self-exultant. He's saying, look what we've done for you, and look what we're doing for Bani Israel. Musa is highlighting, see, he's flipping the conversation round immediately. And he's saying, you're calling this a favor that you're raising this generation? You're oppressive towards them. This, you've enslaved them. Don't be surprised, dear brothers and sisters, if one of the initial missions of Musa was not to free Bani Israel, but to make them understand that they are enslaved. Because when you live under a Taghuti regime for so long, sometimes, especially the next generations, they start to identify with that Taghuti. Just absolutely fantastic. You've actually just made them into your pets, used by you. You're not some sort of deficient lord. No, you're an overlord and you're tyrannical. Okay, because oftentimes this is what the tyrants will also say. Look how many advantages we're giving to the people. Look how good we're being to them. But the reality is that they've enslaved them. Okay, and so one of the missions of the prophets and of rights that you think that you have, they're actually not that great because they're actually in a sense, just making you into tools of their system. So, so Pharaoh says to him now in verse 23, "And what is the Lord of the worlds?" قال فرعون وما رب العالمين. Because previously Musa introduced himself as the messenger, and he's come from the Lord of the worlds, Allah. And so the thing that I wanted to highlight about this word is the word ma. He doesn't say man Rabbul Alameen. He doesn't say who is the world, Lord of the worlds. He says ma Rabbul Alameen. What is the Lord of the worlds? What is this? Okay, it's a subtle point which you can pick up over the translations, but it's more apparent from the Arabic. And so this is a kind of mockery of the Pharaoh. But as well as that, the thing that I wanted to point out here is that sometimes what happens is, and we do this as well, we dehumanize, we depersonify God. If you'll notice, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is spoken about as He in the Quran, right? Is given almost astaghfirullah, but a personality. And in the ahkads of the Ahlul Bayt too, we would say He is, right? Now, the idea here is that, of course, Allah is not a person, He's not a human, right? But the idea is to personify Him in order to get closer to Him, in order to understand Him. If you guys watch a lot of Western media, which, for example, even in the Chinese traditions, I love Kung Fu Panda, so I'm just going to throw that out there, right? Kung Fu Panda, for example, it has this spiritual undertone to it, which I feel is really beneficial for children as well. And they talk about the universe. The universe has given us an answer. The universe has sent us the dragon warrior. The Western world, when it comes to nature, will also do this, where if you're watching a nature show, they'll say, Mother Nature has done this, or science has done this, And so they're talking essentially about Allah. But the problem is they've removed that personal feeling that you get when you say he, right? It's when you personify even an object, suddenly you feel an attachment to it that makes it relatable. And so what Pharaoh is doing here is he's removing that perception of it, and he's actually saying, what is this? What is the Lord of the worlds? And then Musa goes on, and then he talks about how the Lord of the heavens, of the earth, and that which is between them, if you should be convinced. And he says, Pharaoh at this point in verse 25, people, and he says, are you listening to this guy? Sorry, the translation actually says, said to those around him, Pharaoh said to those around him, "Do you not hear?" قال لمن حوله ألا تستمعون. So here again, you have to really visualize what's happening. He's almost turning to the people and saying, "Are you listening to this guy? So crazy. Isn't this mental? Absolutely crazy. The Lord of the world, one God, absolutely ridiculous." Moses said, "Your Lord and the Lord of your first forefathers." Okay, so I'm gonna give you my own translation. Before I do that, I'm gonna give you the Arabic, okay? قال ربكم ورب آبائكم الأولين. So Musa says Pharaoh is saying, who is the Lord of the worlds? And what does Musa say? He's not only your Lord, but he's the Lord of your first forefathers. Essentially, he's saying he's not only your God, he's the God of your daddy and your daddy's daddies, right? So you see, if you go through this entire conversation, you see how Salam was when he introduced himself, when he pitched his mission to the Pharaoh immediately presented him with these pinching questions to try to lure him into a debate which won't actually lead anywhere, and to further demonstrate how untrustworthy Musa is. This is a runaway and a fugitive, right? But instead of lured into that, Musa alayhi salam just says, "Yeah, you're absolutely right, but also, why have you enslaved these people? Why have you done this?" And now he's saying, not only is he your God, but he's the God of your daddy and your daddy's daddies. Subhanallah. So, and this is actually showing you and actively training you how you should speak to those aggressive, tyrannical powers. The Quran is almost like a divine handbook for revolution. It's actively teaching you not only in the spiritual sense, but even in the sense of how to enter into rhetoric with oppressors. Okay, and then it goes on, and then Pharaoh says, "Indeed, your messenger who has been sent you with you is mad." And then he says, Musa replies to him again, and he says, "Your Lord Allah is the Lord of the East and the West and that which is between them. If you were to reason," and because we've run out of time, I'm going to end the discussion here, inshallah. But I just want to extrapolate a little bit from this verse before we end that, because it's very, very telling. قال رب المشرق والمغرب وما بين إن كنتم تعقلون. So here, dear brothers and sisters, the concept of nationalism is actually brought into it. The concept of racism, perhaps, tribalism, because one of the things that the tyrant will always do is inspire a sense of nationalism, nationalistic pride, tribalism, idol worship. If you look at any idol worship society today and throughout history, they always end up having some sort of caste system, some sort of lower people and higher people. And this creates the kind of structure by which the taghuts at the top can continue to divide and rule, continue to control the people. And so this theme is actually very apparent in this response of Musa alayhi salam. Because when Pharaoh tries to call him mad and calls this whole mission mad, Musa again is highlighting that Allah is the Lord of the East and the Wests. He is the one God. And then he tells him that you should use reason. If you were actually contemplating, if you were actually looking at things from a rational point of view, then what I'm saying to you would have made sense. Now, of course, the Taghut doesn't want that to happen. And very quickly, I have to throw this out there because it's an absolutely profound point. And I only learned this when I read Imam Khomeini's book. Which book was it? Tarh Kulli. Right? There's a book called Tarh Kulli where he actually goes through the Quran and he explains a kind of an overview of the entire Quran and the direction of the Quran. It's a very interesting book. But one of the sections which I found particularly interesting is where he talked about the Tawaghit. See, people have this misconception in their minds, and they think that the tyrannical overlords, the Quraysh, for example, yeah, he said as soon as he starts, all right, they pray that have difficulties going in order to avoid that in the future. Please do keep praying. Pray for the best, inshallah. Make full use of these nights of Qadr, inshallah. Put a little prayer in there for me as well, and for Sid can. But most and most importantly, please do pray for Imam Zaman, inshallah, because we're heading towards some major plot twists. God bless you all, and we're going to go for a short break, and then we're going to Allah wa barakatuh.